But wow, am I grateful to the virtual dojo for letting us do this 90-day period, this habit of freedom practice. It's been a rich time for me. I think for many of us, things we've been chewing on, working on. It's coming to an end. We're wrapping it up with Spring Keishin, just a little over a week away. And you know, as I think about and listen to the different talks we've had as part of this series, and we've come to appreciate, I think, that habits are inevitable. They are breakable. They are trainable. They are identified with. We draw identity from those habits. They can be better and worse in terms of I'll say leading us toward the way or away from the way. Or Andy gave the example of good, bad, and ugly habits, habits that bring us joy and happiness, habits that bring us suffering, and habits that cause suffering to others. You know, if I look closely at my own life, some of the naughtiest habits for me have been both good and bad. You know, they've had both roles, where I think about, Gordon spoke to how he had a great image of a bungee cord of habits where, you know, we train and we train and we think we're, you know, making some kind of progress, or we're breaking through this, and then we kind of bungee cord back to a self so comfortable that knows itself. This was such a frustration to me in my Zen training, because at that time we didn't have the virtual dojo. So when I did my Zen training, I was always going off traveling somewhere. You know what I mean for Zen training is the intensive sessions. I would be sitting on my own, but then I'd go over to Chicago or go to Hawaii for intensive training and have this like mind-blowing experience. And then I go back and it was sort of like, what was the mean time to lose that experience? You know, how long would it take before I was bungee cording back into something that felt more familiar? I had a deep habit in my body of, I'll call it holding it together, the holding it together habit. I bet some of you can identify with that. Good under pressure, you know, as I think back to my young childhood, I had a mother who fell apart a lot, and in today's terminology would probably be diagnosed as bipolar. And so I felt like I had to hold it together. I mean, hold emotions together, hold the family together, hold the household together, hold myself together, hold whatever together. And I thought that was, I mean, for me, that was like, that's how I got through my childhood, right? And I had all the skin rashes and asthma to prove it. I was a mess, but I was holding it together. I remember distinctly at some point in my early 20s taking pride in the fact that I never cried. I never cried. I mean, I know a lot of men kind of get that kind of attitude. It's a little weird for a woman to get it, I guess, but somehow, and I think back, how bottled up did I have to be to never cry? Can you imagine how numb I had to be to never register emotion at the level where I would cry? I can't even fathom it anymore. I mean, now I tear up at the start of the Budweiser horse commercials, you know, but at the time I was completely stuck. And it was all somehow in this habit of holding it together. You know? Well, what is the it in that sentence? It's a self, right? It's a self. Holding the self together. So this source of pride of how unemotional I was really became a huge stumbling block in my training and in my life. I mean, I'll say my training showed me what a stumbling block it was in life. Can you imagine my relationships? You know? When I was a little kid, my dad used to watch me, work so hard and get stuff. And he would say, "You have more stick-to-itiveness than any person I know." So I take great pride in that. I have stick-to-itiveness. I follow through. I work hard at things. Years later, I was at the dojo, and Tanoi Roshi looked at me, and he pointed to my big toe. It's only someone like Tanoi Roshi could do. He points at my big toe, which was heavily calloused because I'd been Aikidoist and always on mats where your feet get really calloused. But my big toe was really calloused. And he goes, "Look at that toe. You are the most stubborn person I've ever met." I'm thinking about my father's stick-to-itiveness, Tanoi Roshi's stubbornness. I like my father's version better, but Tanoi Roshi's was probably closer to the mark. Stubborn, really stubborn. And so what would happen even in Zen training is there'd be these moments of breakthrough, but then pshum, bungee cord back into the self that holds everything together. Do you understand what I'm getting at? It was like something that couldn't let go. Couldn't let go. There was a time, and this was in my 30s, where I was talking with Tanoi Roshi in the kitchen, and I don't even actually remember the context. We were talking, I was running a dojo, and we were talking about the dojo in Atlanta, and something about this whole thing. And we were talking about like organization stuff, in a way it could be considered dry as toast, but there was some issue in the room. And then he just started slicing into me. I mean, slicing and dicing me into pieces. I don't even remember why. I just remember I started crying, and I cried for hours. I cried for days. And, it brings to mind another image that Gordon shared with us of a beaver dam. You remember his image of a beaver dam? That when you start taking the sticks out and the flow comes through, eventually the whole dam can break, right? The whole dam can break. So some of the habits that we can be proudest of or think are our winning way are the very things that can so get in the way. Even the word pride, can kind of be a hint, in that sentence. The word pride can kind of show us, yeah, that's what's probably going to cause you trouble. And as we've said, we often don't see habits when we're in them. They just feel like our comfort zone. It's like, well, that's how I do things. We don't even think of it as a habit. And I think about the efficiency of our training for going after this stuff. And that's what I would like to speak to some tonight. Because it's this deep old stuff that we don't look at, that we don't even remember our life before it patterned this way. We don't even remember who we were before we were that, before we were the kid who held things together, or whatever your version of that is. Because what all of us have in common is we had to survive our childhood. And we probably didn't start with a blank slate. We probably inherited a little intergenerational trauma, like, along the way. Epigenetic transfer of stuff in our family, all the mechanisms we're learning about for how we pick up that stuff. we've spoken about how habits can limit us, can hold us back, can hold us in this past, because they patterned us at one age when they were maybe even a little useful. Maybe sometimes it was useful to hold it together when I was a kid, but then they completely outlived their usefulness because they patterned in the body. And again, we just do things that way. We don't even know really that was a habit. I didn't know I had that habit. They become even the things that we become unconsciously competent in, riding a bike. We don't think about our habit of riding a bike. It's like muscle memory. You never forget it. You get on the bike, you always remember, right? Or some of the training we do in martial arts. You're cutting with the sword, you're punching, you're doing arimanagi so many times. It's in your bones. You can do it in your sleep. These are deeply patterned things, right? That we think of as being unconsciously competent. And yet, sometimes habits free us and sometimes they confine us. And in this time, in this period, you've been invited, we've been invited, we've all been invited to explore what's the difference between patterns that set us free and patterns that make us limited, smaller, constrained. We see it as we age. I see it as I age. That how a comfort zone becomes almost like a prison, or almost like if you stay in it, it keeps getting smaller, it keeps getting smaller, with a point where we've all met people in our lives who, as they age, they become almost like caricatures of their earlier self. And other people, as they age, they become freer and emptier. What's the difference? What's the difference? I would submit it has a lot to do with how we can even, we say even in the form of Zazen, you can be free in the form. How can we be free in the form that our bodies take to build habits? It's by going after the deep old stuff, the stuff that we don't even remember what we were like before it. And how do we go after that? Well, look at how we're training. Look at this training. We say Hojo walk, or Hojo is about taking away the habits since the day you were born. We talked about this the first time. Nobody taught you how to walk, and none of you learned how to do Hojo walk as a kid. You all had some other kind of walk that you've taken into your life that patterned in the body. And then at some point we see Hojo walk, and it's like, well, that's different. Different breathing, different rhythm, different way that you roll the foot, different weighting on the foot. And all this stuff has to be worked through so that your body, my body, can do that, right? All this attention to detail so that our bodies can do that. Tonight, I'd like to look at Zazen itself. No one taught us how to breathe as a kid, how to sit, how to hold our bodies upright in gravity. We kind of figured it out as best we could on our own, for better or worse. But those are the very habits we're going right back through when we sit Zazen. So how does Zazen become a habit to break habits? How can it become a way to kind of pull some of the twigs out of the dam that everything can flow? Well, let me give you 5 ways. And then maybe you can make up some more. Maybe you have some more. But here are 5 ways that Zazen can be a habit to break habits that I've found really helpful. Number 1, how you breathe. How you breathe. Again, this is deep old stuff. How you breathe in Zazen is probably different than you breathed as a child. When you first learned about Hara breathing, you probably noticed this wasn't your ordinary everyday breathing. And yet I heard early on in my training, change how you breathe and you'll change your life. I thought, I wonder how that works. But of course it works, because everything we do can be integrated with that breath. So when you change the base, you change everything that rests on that base, right? You change everything. No one who comes to Zazen is totally familiar with Hara breathing at the start. No one I've met anyway. As we delve deeper into how to breathe into the Hara, what I ran into, I bet many of you did as well, is everything that's in the way. Tension of the solar plexus, I didn't know I was holding. That took about 15 years to find. Tension in the sternum, because I had a habit of breathing high in the chest as a childhood asthmatic, and so something had to be released in here. There was something in the lower back that wasn't working. And I approached Hara development with a real martial intensity. That was my training. I was learning about it a lot in Aikido, keep one point. I was learning about it in Hara development. It seemed like you had to be really young to do this, right? And so I put tons of tension in all the wrong places, trying to develop my Hara breathing. And the very tension I was putting into it was stopping the breath from dropping into Hara. You look at someone like Honda Roshi, when he plays shakuhachi, and things are so relaxed, right? It's like his belly gets so big. It's like so fluid. But that wasn't how I was learning early on, right? That's something we come to eventually when we start to feel into what does it take for breath to drop to the very base of my body? Or putting it another way, for the muscles at the very base of my body to be able to regulate the breath from underneath. So I got very curious about that. And it became a physical study, as I bet many of you have been exploring too, a physical study. How can I breathe even slower? How can I breathe even lower? How could that muscle get involved in breathing? How about that one? Playing around with it. Breath is also conscious and unconscious, right? If you think about your breath, you can regulate it. Make it slower, make it faster, higher, lower. But before you're thinking about it, it's still functioning. So it shows us that it's this gateway or this ambassador between conscious and unconscious mind. So when the breath changes, it can reach parts of us that we don't have conscious access to. That's a really efficient way to train. Second way Zazen can become the habit to break all habits. Don't move. Don't move. Who have you ever met for whom that's comfortable? That's not comfortable. So instantly it's going to take us out of our comfort zone, because there's not a lot of other places in life where you sit still, where you stop. Not a lot of places in my life where we stop. No one is comfortable with that at its start, where you stop the body and the mind keeps running. At least mine does. Mine did. Mine does. So what it forces is the new way of having to work with mind-body integration, with self-regulation. You start to see your mind. You start to see what it does. I could start to see, for example, how my thoughts would develop to prevent boredom. Like if things were just completely smoothed out, a thought would assert itself just to have something to do. It was wild. But if you really watch your mind, you'll catch yourself in the act. Or to separate from emotion. When I'm, you know, how if you've ever been in a movie, maybe this only happens if you're the kid who tries to hold it all together and not cry. But I remember watching movies where they'd get really emotional part. And so rather than just feel the raw emotion of the movie, I'd start thinking. I'd start going up into my head and think, because it was a way to separate from emotion. You catch your mind in all these acts. You put a clutch in the transmission. I know we don't drive standard shift anymore. Most people don't. But what that's pointing to is there's a separation between impulse and action. So a thought can arise, but I'm not acting on it because the body's still. So now I'm creating space between the arising of thought and the acting on it. And in that space, there's a freedom, a choice, something that can form. Like that's kind of dumb. Don't do that. We also start to see, I'll call it what's going on. We start to see how we hold ourselves together. We start to see habits of thought. We start to see what do we do when our leg starts hurting. We start to witness or be with the very process that we're putting ourselves through in training, this so-called witness perspective. We start to see the ego that is integrating all this. And we start to see through the ego that's integrating all this. Bob Keegan, a great psychologist, talks about this as moving from where we're just the subject or we're just subjectively experiencing everything, so it kind of gets all of us, to where we can see it and have some choice about it. He calls it a subject to object distinction. But and I don't want to say that in a way that creates a false duality, but there's a sense where in seeing something, it doesn't get all of us anymore. There's a sense where that which sees, the awareness which sees, is itself free of the condition. And increasingly, we can drop into that just awareness rather than the drama of the particular subjective experience that awareness is aware of. That was kind of an awkward sentence, but I hope you can follow what I'm saying. When we see a habit, of thought, when we see, there I go again, trying to hold it together or whatever, it brings something, a habit, into conscious awareness. And it's only when habits are brought into conscious awareness that we can start to rework them. That we can rework them, that we can make new choices about them, that we can, Rebecca talked about these habits loops early on. I talked about them some, but they follow a kind of loop where there's a trigger, a behavior, a reward, and they just kind of feed themselves on and on and on. When we see them, we can go like, oh, so that's what I'm doing. Well, so that trigger, I'm doing that behavior. This is what I'm getting out of it, but I don't want that anymore. So when that triggers, I'm going to do a different behavior. I'm going to get a better reward. I'm going to run this cycle a little differently. We can rework habits. So we start to use the way we work to move to where we want to go rather than, or to use ourselves in the way that we want to use this life, rather than it using us. We can't change habits that we don't see, that we don't face. Even once we see it, we may not be able to change it. But we can start to see through it and hold it more lightly. because the part of us that sees it is not itself stuck. So what's the third way that Zazen can be the habit to break habits? Accepting discomfort. Accepting discomfort without running away. This has been a really important one for me. I don't know anyone who gets a pain-free ride through Zen training. I hope I'm not the first one who told you that. But if you train seriously enough and intensely enough, you know, you're gonna face all kinds of physical pain, all kinds of, I'll call them inner demons, shadow side, you know, all kinds of stuff in yourself, you know, like there's a kind of rhythm in multi-day training where often it's like in a week-long training. By day 3, you're not close enough to the end for the light at the end of the tunnel, but you're far enough in for a lot of stuff to be coming up, emotional stuff, feelings of, you know, failure. I'll never get through this. This is awful. This sucks. What am I doing? Blah, 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 blah. I was in a session one time where one of my friends was melting down this way. And another friend just looked at her watch. She goes, day 3 of session, right on schedule. But I mean, this stuff happens. This stuff happens. But when we don't quit, when we don't run away, when we just accept it is what it is, and I'm here for it, something is developing through that process that makes us courageous. I used to run away from conflict a lot as a kid. You know, it was part of my walk on eggshells routine to handle a really difficult family situation when I was trying to hold it together, right? So it was really hard for me to face difficult, angry conversations and angry people and people who fight with me. And that was a habit I took deep into adulthood for sure. But this kind of training helped me say, if I can face all that pain in the cushion, why can't I face this awkward conversation? What's the difference? And, you know, it started to kind of register with me that I didn't actually have to run away. I could be present. Take that a step further into facing suffering, something Gordon speaks so passionately about. You know, there's a, you know, when we're young, when I was young, I would not want to face into suffering. I'd avert my eyes. I'd want to run away. Or, you know, when people have struggling in their family, they often find all their friends distance themselves because they don't want to deal with that uncomfortable situation, right? But when you keep training, after a while, you think, how could this suffering be any worse than what I've been through? You know, it's like, I've seen worse. So this is like child's play. This is like, I'm right there. If I can accept this, I can accept this. So it's a deep kind of not running away. Boy, it has really freed me from a habit of avoiding ugliness. It allows us to run toward trouble. When someone needs help, we go in, not out. Whoa, what's the power in that? We can actually be of some use. Amazing. Fourth way that Zazen can be a habit to break habits. So far we have breathing. It changes how we breathe, deep and old. So it's going to have to work through all the stuff that constricted our breath. Second way, don't move. So it's going to break through all those tendencies where we use movement to stay in our comfort zone one way or another. So it's going to interrupt all that. Third way, accepting discomfort without running away. Fourth way, opens the senses. to present moment awareness, opens the senses. It's deep sensory training. As we've said, it's not, it's not just whether you have a sense, it's how attuned that sense is, how active it is in being able to engage and create in the moment, not just receive, but it's, when waves come together, both are changed. And as we interact with the world, moment by moment, our senses are interacting with those energetic fields in an act of co-creation. Most people, this one included, spend a lot of their time in their head. We say in Zen, be in the present moment, but if you're not in the present moment, where the heck are we? We're somewhere lost in thought, usually involving some time besides now. Worried about the future, the past, or the this, or out there, somewhere other than where we are. And in that lost in the head, it itself can become a habit of thought that becomes a part of our comfort zone. Think about how you answer the question, how are you? What's your go-to answer? Most people have a go-to answer. How are you? Oh, I'm fine. Oh, I'm busy. Oh, I'm this, I'm that, I'm, whatever, right? These are habits of thought. When you simplify it down to a basic, as simple as counting from 1 to 10, that's pretty basic. There's not a lot of thought involved in that. I know early on in my training, I read a lot of books in Buddhism and other traditions, and in ways that different traditions would meditate, and lots of different guided meditations, and meditating on your death, and meditating on dreams, and meditating on decaying of bones, and meditating on, and I was thinking, whoa, it's a lot to think about. That was like feeding candy to a thinking brain. Here, it's like 1, 2, 3. It's like so dull. It's wonderful. There's nothing to grab onto. There's nothing to think about. So it's going to interrupt habits of thought, habits of the way we like to think about things. And in that interruption, the senses have room to spread out. They're not being wiped out by all this cognitive filtering and noise. They have room, the image it comes to mind is when a person has a sense that is compromised, say they've lost their vision, how the parts of the brain associated with hearing become much bigger, richer, and densely populated, right? Or if they lose, another sense, like the feeling cortex, somatosensory cortex gets much more refined. Or if they play the violin, the part of the brain associated with fine finger movement gets much more articulated. So we are always adapting to how we use our senses and which senses get to play the most. But if we are always in our heads thinking, no sense gets to play a lot, if you understand what I mean, because we can end up making life like a video game, like a, little video processing and a lot of thought. But when the thought quiets down, the senses are like having a party, right? Vision gets sharper, hearing gets sharper. And it's not, again, just a reception, it's a co-creation. So instead of, you've heard me liken it to feasting, a buffet line of life where we're always drawing the same things out that reinforce our identity. Instead of feasting on this buffet line, what we're doing is rather than just say drawing from the buffet line the usual suspects that we always feast on, we're actually feasting on the whole buffet. We're just sensing the moment as it's able to be played with. Another way of saying it, we talked about the sneaky work of habits. It allows us to be more in the present rather than in a habitual past, a patterned or conditioned past. More here, more now. It's really struck me in this study of resonance that has so interested me in the last couple of years, is that this sense of how our body works as an antenna or a transmitter receiver, what energies it's able to pick up, how sensitive we allow ourselves to become, has everything to do with what we can create. That's where it happens. It's where it happens. So the fourth way that Zazen can break through habits, or be the habit that breaks through habits, is by how it explodes our senses. And then the fifth way, I'll just say, is samadhi. Samadhi, the illusion of separation falls away, and it's just, you sit the whole room. A wonderful, a blissful feeling, but it's a wow feeling from the start. But it cannot be willed. The I that would will it, we can't order it up like pizza. Yet it opens us to a different sense of self or of who we are. That is not definable, not constricted, not inside prison bars. The I, it's like relaxes its grip. Nothing to hold together here. Nothing to hold it with. And the incredible thing about that is that when I doesn't have to be reinforced by habit. Remember, habits reinforce a sense of self. I's drawing identity from that junk. And when I doesn't need that anymore, when I relaxes its grip, it doesn't need that anymore. It flips around from thought having to be there to reify a self to not having to think, not having to put in all that effort. So in the West, the famous, Descartes dictum of "I think, therefore I am," it flips around to I'm not, so I don't have to think, or like I don't have to keep reifying a self, so I don't have to obsessively loop through this same stuff. There's nothing to protect here. There's nothing to reify. When habits lose their self-reinforcing job, they cease to be gripped so tightly. They're no longer existential. And that's freedom, writ large. They're no longer, we don't have so much invested in them. Much easier to be free. So those are my 5 things. Think about your own experience in Zazen. How is it helping you in a habit of freedom? How does it help you as a habit to break habits? Anything you'd add or ask about in your own experience?
it took me much too long to understand that the amount of time we spend in formal sitting is very short compared to the rest of our life.
Yeah.
So for me, what was very important was to be able to do zazen all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And
And
what helped you do zazen all the time? What was that leap for you?
it's three things. It's very simple, but it's not easy. First thing, maintain your vision. Try to keep that 180-degree vision. Yeah. Second thing is always feel your feet on the ground. And the third thing is breathe from your lower abdomen. That's all it is. But you try and do that all the time. You will find how difficult it is.
Mm.
And because it's so difficult, we cannot do it all the time. And that's fine because if you're paying attention and you know when you're not doing it, that's when you can catch yourself and go, oh, okay.
Okay.
And you try get back in it. Now, in the beginning, you'll be in and out of it hundreds of times a day. And, there are times when you're not in it and you feel guilty, you feel bad. No, don't do that. If you're not in it, you just go, oh, okay. It's like you hit the reset button, boom, you go back in it. 2 minutes later, you might be out of it. No problem. Hit the reset button and go back in. Now, if you do this enough, you will hit the reset button less and less and less. And Omar Roshi said, if you can go through the entire day, maybe hitting the reset button just a few times, for him, that was a good day of training.
That's great.
But to get to that point takes, takes years and years. So that's what I work on. Every time I get pissed off, I go, okay, I know why I got pissed off because I didn't do one of those three things. So you just hit the reset button, you go back in and you go, okay, until you get pissed off again, then you gotta do the same thing over again. But that's what Shugyo is, over and over and over and over. Yeah, that's what I learned from doing this for a long time.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So zazen is a habit to break habits and make zazen all the time. How about that? that's that's excellent.
It's
So
so
three
simple.
things.
Yeah.
So simple. 180-degree vision. Feel your feet in the earth. Breathe from the hara. Mm,
Very simple, but not easy.
excellent.
You try to do that for a week, it'll change your life.
Well, what a great charge for our last week of the 90-day training period. How about that? Let's take the Honda Roshi challenge. See what you can do with hitting the reset button to 180-degree vision, feet in the earth, hara breathing, or just notice when we get out of it. Notice without judgment. Take the training in the direction it needs to go for you this coming week. And I think we've got a talk with Ryan Roshi this weekend, yeah, on Sunday, right? And Keishin next Thursday. So we'll bring it on home.